yo te le, ay, oh, yo te le, ay, oh, yo te le, ay, oh, yo te le. Welcome, friends. A little overdue, but I feel like our Geminis needed time to stew. Anyway, so happy solar season to our Gemini friends. And I guess I also didn't realize how many Geminis I have in my life and like birthdays to celebrate and stuff. Uh, funny, funny all around. Um, because in Western astrology, that would be my south node, and that southern antipode, if you know me and my readings, is always very important. And so perhaps there's an element of procrastination in myself anyway. What have you been procrastinating on, dear? But I told a friend I would do it for them, that they were going to be my motivation. Do it for Johnny. And so we will pull some cards and we will see what all signs have to receive in this energy. But we'll start with Gemini because it is my birthday present to you. But before we get too ahead of ourselves, don't mind me. These are headphones. I will be adjusting them because they do not stay in my stretched ears. Um, the solar Western Gemini is a positive energy reciprocal, as opposed to like a void entropy, essentially, which is interesting, because it is typically associated with an air sign. So oftentimes people kind of find that aloof, find that sort of spaciousness, can sometimes find that as an emptiness, um, so to speak. Definitely does have the common element of Mercury, but directionally, elementally, we would be looking more at northern direction and air, or eastern direction and water, which is very much how these things flow. If you consider like creating bubbles, creating flow, creating um, even more maybe viscous material, like the ways in which you get a layer at the top if you like blow into your straw in a drink, right? Then it sort of fizzes all of this energy at the top because you instill and imbue oxygen. And I think that's very important because Gemini in a Western context can get very tied up in a two-dimensional quality of this or that, of left or right, when in fact there is much more to be said about the distance or closeness in between these things. Um, Closeness not to be confused with conflation. And much like in water, or in this eastern direction water, the distance between hydrogen bonds actually holds a lot of information. And so if you consider that that is not just the wanton for learning and education and resource, but also beyond just learning, or like Western academic system would enact, but the regurgitation of knowledge, or the regurgitation of information and not of knowledge. Let me be very clear about that. Um, in order to synthesize said thoughts or said learnings, would then equate teacher, would then equate, uh, like a like many of us have spiritual teachers, not because they taught us how to do the thing, but because they asked us the right questions. I know in the last reading I said something about terrible twos, right? And we were very early on in all of these energies. And in that, the way kids are like, why, but why, but why, but why? And sometimes to break that cycle of just getting lost in the why, is to form a new kind of question, to expand your curiosity, and to be able to see the relevancy and also the differences in things, um, to synthesize new information, to synthesize a new conclusion, which I mean is ultimately good writing, right? Is ultimately like the best teachers. not the ones that just read from the book and regurgitate. We will be reading from a book, but if you know me, I love to stop and throw my own 2 cents in there. And so in Mexica astrology or in Telegi astrology, um, what we would be working with would be more so the panther or the reed, or the serpent and the seed. And if you consider what a widespread amount of elements. And so, again, rather than Gemini just be this or that, or just be air, there's many qualities in air. Quite honestly, air can be combustible, air can be very humid, air can be very dense. And so, we do have all elements at play in this, which is maybe why people also have the idea that like Geminis can't make up their mind or what have you, because what is ultimately lacking is an understanding of all elements that are in play. And again, why I'm always drawn to antipodes, because I want to see what elements are hidden. And that's all very important considering what the planets will be doing throughout this month and up until now. Venus and Jupiter's conjunction for sure, Mercury at dichotomy, which will pass between the Earth and the Sun um, just before the new moon. And will be like present but harder to spot, so like very visible but also very hidden, almost like hidden in plain sight. And sometimes that's the very obvious synthesis of truth, that when you are only looking for what you have been told to look for, you tend to miss entirely. We tend to miss entirely. The moon and Saturn will also very much finesse each other. There will be a conjunction with the moon and Mars on the 12th, so upcoming. The new moon upcoming as well, I believe the 14th. And the moon and Mercury in relationship in conjunction on the 16th. The solstice around, if not on the 21st, is when Gemini energy will officially move closer toward its following energy, and will take what it's learned and utilize it in the coming days and the coming astrological seasons. And will be gifted a meteor shower and Venus on high. So, of all the things that we can learn, I do think it's very much assisting us in this bonding of and uniting of mind and heart, not just mind and mind, not just mind and body, beyond the material, but mind and heart. Much like even left brain, right brain synchronicity is unified in the brainstem, is unified in its own tertiary element. And so we're going to read a little bit about what this Cherokee astrology book has to say about Panther and the Reed. It's Animal Medicine in the Stars by Raven Hale, who has since passed. But there is a plethora of beautiful information in here and is a book one of its kind. And I took it upon myself to dig into this ephemeris and calculate what all of these astrological signs that we are aware of or have been told we are in Western astrology, and how that can more deeply integrate and identify in Telegi and Mishika astrology. And so we'll start with the Panther and the Reed and see where we go from there. In the Panther, Sahoni. North, like I said, a contract with the subconscious, the hotline from Nadir or the interior of the earth to the zenith or the North Star, which, much like I always say, Western astrology leads you to the ego and the mind and madness by design. Vedic astrology will lead you to the heart. So your Western Venus is much more an integral northern direction than what we have been given. And indigenous astrology very much, I think, teaches you how to unite those things, to see it in the sky, to feel it in the earth, and to unite those elements, much like we have, guttural energy and intuition, heart energy, and feeling and knowing, and the mind and the ways in which it allows these sensations to inhabit our physical space. And with this total understanding, I've really only seen people step well into themselves and step up in exactly the ways that they want to. The panther or the magician would be an appropriate symbol. Coral as a color, coral and turquoise very much have this dichotomous relationship, or this you sort of twin-like unified relationship. Rose quartz is a stone, air is an element, morning glory or sweet potato as a flower, and blackberry as the herb, which can also make black tea. And of the many benefits of black tea, um, is a way in which I think indigenous people had these imbibing rituals and these integrating rituals well before what we've been caused and coaxed into consuming. So, in the sky, it is the fire panther. Comets, meteors, meteorites, shooting stars, and fireballs. Comets are ill omens, and shooting stars are lucky signs. Like I said, gifted a meteor shower toward the end of the month after the solstice. Um, they're magicians and prognosticators. Tons of meteoric dust fall on Earth each day, and some end up as chunks of meteoric iron. Ooh, in the blood, passing through the body, passing nutrients through the body. Again, the space in between, not just this or that, not just left or right. The early morning Leo constellation meteors appearing around the middle of November are heralds of the coming light, the Cherokee New Year. Shadow of the Sphinx, herald of the dawn, panther people are creatures of the night, minions of the sun who patrol the dark side from sunset to sunrise. When the sun is traveling through the underworld, panther is also called mountain lion, painter, catamount, puma, and cougar. There were two Cherokee warrior societies, the Eagles, who are the actual soldiers, and the Panthers, who were the warriors of the dark and the night, which again, much like I always say, the concept of warrior in an indigenous sense was never about maintaining war. It was always about peace. It was always about a responsibility to peace. And if you read Speaking Truth to the Power of Peace, a resource document of mine, then I cite a particular source that is the World Peace Index that actually goes into countries and the ways in which they actually invest into these endeavors, and very much in a literal way displays these things, and how some countries, like America, has much more of a responsibility to cultivation of war than they do peace. Much like in the ways that plastic surgery, Botox, even pop culture and the ways in which they call, very dangerously skinny, um, toned, or what have you, is the ways in which we falsify the idea that Western culture falsifies the idea of preservation of life. Um, even in burial, the ways in which they preserve the body with chemical, is actually a consummation of death. Is actually constantly consuming death, and more so preserving death than it is life. Um, da 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 da. Hmm. From sunset to sunrise. When the sun is traveling through the underworld. Panther is also called mountain lion, painter, catamount, puma, and cougar. There were two Cherokee, oh, I read that, da 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 da, who are warriors of the dark of the night. Scouts, advance guards, spies, or intelligence corps. Neither of these were men's societies, for women were admitted when they fulfilled the initiation rites, and men were allowed to join the so called women's societies. Interesting. What an inversion of the society we live in today. And men were allowed to join the so called women's societies. Agriculture, cooking, baby care, if they wanted to, with no loss of face. Which realistically, and this is something that's coming out a lot more on TikTok and on YouTube, the ways in which yes men have critiqued this, choosing the bear concept, but would also choose the bear in themselves, and fear even admitting their own fear of other men, because of what they've experienced and what they've known. Um, there was like a creator that went around and like street interviewed people and asked men would they leave their kids alone with this person in this picture, and unanimously it was absolutely no. So it's not all men, but even men don't trust other men, but they also refuse to acknowledge that because that would break face essentially. Then that would be degrading to them in this culture, when realistically, as a trans person, as a trans mass person, I think that Western men haven't the slightest clue what manhood is. They don't know how to honor, they don't know how to protect. And that's not, me coming for anybody. That's me speaking generally as to the society that we were raised in. Most men have a very material and superficial idea of what that even means. And it's usually at their own, like at their own sacrifice or at their own that for the causing of their own pain, for their own detriment, really. Like I say all the time with patriarchy doesn't serve men either. It requires their subservience, and it's a facade that any of them are leaders when they've really just been made concubines for classism. Sorry, I'll get back to the book. In the Panther Society, a female could be a regular Matahari. A male was a potential James Bond. I don't know what that means. Okay. In line with the reputed belief of Native Americans that they descend from eagles, the Cherokee myth is that the people are descended from Sakoni, or the panther spirit. There are also, across indigenous nations, the creation story that we are from the stars. Sahoni is to the panther as Thunderbird is to the eagle. This is the day sign of a medicine woman or man, a wizard or magician, conjurer, or an oracle, one who sees through a glass darkly, the beam of light from the spirit world, as though a somewhat transparent window, one who can gaze into a mirror, a portal to see the other world and distinguish true reality from the soul force. This requires both like paradoxical duality and also transcendence from in non duality, which is deliberately obfuscated in Western astrology. The personality is aware of currents that are in the interior, unseen forces that are nevertheless quite powerful, such as earthquakes. One who needs a quiet time to channel messages from dreams and spirits. A retreat from the hurly burly of the world for uninterrupted meditation. This sign is proud, conceited, haughty, over modesty is never one of their faults. Daring, presumptuous, and courageous, open hearted, independent, dauntless, and grave, more prone to action than to talking about it, eager for success and willing to work for it, a stout heart ready to fight for right, a champion of the underdog. And specifically with this word right, in indigenous philosophy, it's not as simple as right or wrong. That's a very two-dimensional and flattened perspective. It transcends that, as in right relationship, as in much like the geometry of a triangle. All angles respond to and inform each other. With a smile and an optimistic outlook. A dreamer who wastes no time making those dreams a reality. An intense worker who knows when to let go and relax both body and mind. This is a person who hides behind a mask. Emotions and feelings are hidden well beneath the surface. Traumatic past experiences may cause this person to retreat to an inward sanctuary or to build an armor against the insensitivity of the crowd. One who struggles with self control, aggressive in the more subtle ways, may win his own way in the long stretch by avoiding direct confrontation. Often travels along secret labyrinthine ways toward a desired goal, with no outward signs of directional activity. One seeking complete compatibility between mind, heart, and soul, seeking out partners who fit into the pattern. Using the creative mind. Geminis are always so creative. Following complex charted courses, remaining fearless in the face of constant change. One who can look at the faults and hear the confessions of others without condemning, whose standards for self are not necessarily the same as those for the man in the street, who understands the frailties of the fallen without claiming equal rights to self indulgence. What a beautiful balance. Like the animal, the Gemini is solitary, nocturnal, stealthy, secretive, and powerful. Carnivorous or at best omnivorous, not inclined to be a vegetarian. That's funny. This may be the sign of a competent therapist, counselor, or teacher, spiritual but not necessarily attached to an organized religion. One can only hope. Panthers may be healers, particularly healers of the body through the orientation of the mind. Panther types have perceptive, investigative powers. They see beyond the visible evidence through the shadowy aspects to the very heart of the matter, always with sensitivity and often with psychic undertones. Shapeshifters, manipulators of manifestations. I've heard that a lot in Western astrology too, that Geminis are manipulative. And manipulation isn't an inherently evil term. It is very much what we do with it. And this is why we have Machiavellian tendencies or the dark triad of narcissism, because there's multiple components that have to inform each other, usually denoted by an utter lack of empathy. They will fight to the bitter end. Oh, Panther people are assertive and argumentative. They will fight to the bitter end to win a point, although they hide behind the mask of a smile, a passive aggressive approach that may not be immediately obvious. Interesting. Honestly, I think Gemini would do better to understand that there is more than just winning or losing. And I think that expands knowledge more thoroughly. And I think that holds more holds more energy and entropy in the space in between. They can be cutting and sarcastic while at the same time subtle and devious. Satire is their forte. These individuals have basic intelligence that can be greatly enhanced by a liberal education. Psychology and the social sciences are good exploratory fields. They're outstanding in the art of communication, are often very charismatic speakers, and very persuasive writers. Have an unlimited imagination, are able to visualize a whole gamut of activities from the sublime to the ridiculous, and just might bring them all to virtual reality. They're able to brainstorm a kaleidoscope of innovations that may be as lost in the past as a dinosaur, or as extended into the future as a vacation trip to Mars. Interesting. Interesting. Student of the fossil, eh? No matter that, these things are quite impossible. A panther, nothing's impossible, eh? A panther can capture the imagination of the listener and hold him spellbound. This sign is a builder of castles in the air, who might even put foundations under some of them. Panther is the sun runner, the all seeing eye, the torchbearer who heralds the passing away of darkness and the coming of light. That bond between the two, much like we connect our inhales and exhales, again, space in between. Men of this sign are in danger of becoming chauvinists, and women intellectual snobs. Wow, wow, wow. Some are so in love with the sound of their own voice they engage in monologues instead of conversations. Yes, how many times have I said this month in lives with y'all, if you're on my TikTok, that Geminis love to be heard, but they struggle with listening to others. They row against the current instead of letting or learning to go with the flow. The Great Spirit runs the universe. Never forget that. It's like working with electricity. As long as you remember the rules, you can perform miracles. When you start thinking you're the boss, you get burned to a crisp. Exactly. Grounded circuits. Mwah. You are a channel through which the universal consciousness communicates. Do not editorialize. It's truth that's important, not anyone's personal opinion. You are the messenger, not the message. You are a modern day Moses who guides the people on the long journey toward the light at the end of the tunnel. It is written in the stars. You will not reach the promised land. Interesting. While I'm like generally very anti-biblical, anti-dogma, really. The biblical story of Moses is very interesting because, again, it's not about land or water or the shoreline. And the story gives this imagery of very literally parting the water and creating space in between these two things. and grounding in a very fluid state, so as which to pass more easily. Stellar, 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 stellar. That makes lots and lots of sense to me. But it is not just that, because 12 sign astrology simply does not get or gather the nuance of just how expansive these energies can be. And so the read, Eja, is the direction east, or the way that water carries, the way that information carries, the way that conversation transpires, this rhythm, if you will, creation and recreation. Again, while that is these two things, it is the process in between that weaves them together, like connecting both inhale and exhale. The coming of light, new directions, breaking the ties that bind. Oh gosh, okay, wait. I have to say that too because it's come up too many times. Um, Martha Haveneth is a neuroscientist that studies breathwork and has come to find that the cyclical breathing, i.e., connecting your inhales and exhales fluidly, i.e., no space between, like as smooth of a transition as you can, right? Is actually what can cause visions in breathwork. This is essentially what holotropic breathing capitalizes on, but grounds it in a musical guide, musical experience. And conversely, most of what you'll see on YouTube of DMT breathing is a misuse of fire and is more likely going to cause hypoxia or panic attacks because they never focus on the cycle of breathing or that space in between the breath. It is more so about like hyperventilating, breathing through your mouth, and forcing an experience. And so, more often than not, people are like, oh, no, 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 I can't because it's going to give me anxiety, because it makes my anxiety really bad, because it makes my heart race, it makes me too lightheaded, da 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 da. Mouth breathing has its purpose, but it is not meant for long term sustainable trips, if you will. Even in holotropic breathing, at some point, they cue for you to just sort of rest into a natural rhythm, but to connect those breaths. So consider that when you see these very pretty but nonsensical and useless DMT breathings on YouTube, because they will do more harm than good. If you would like to learn how to direct your fire, you can simply reference any of the cycle of harmonies opportunities that sort of finish off and integrate any of my new moon or full moon readings. Or if you ever catch any lives with me, then that is absolutely something we do to integrate. The coming of light, new directions, breaking the ties that bind. Interesting. So much more than just a point, much more than just a plane, but understanding the nuance of the journey in between these two places, so the connection that these two places come up. Much like even the idea of the twins is has been studied for decades upon decades upon decades from multiple different countries, trying to understand how one twin cells can also feel or interpret the other twin cells across all time and space. Symbol would be reed raft or cornstalk. This is also a very prophetic symbol in a lot of stories, um, because the reed is the sign of growth at the cusp of new elements, is the sign of life after the flood, is a reminder of the wind and its direction and the way the earth speaks to you. The hollow reed is a reoccurring symbol in many indigenous stories as far as a coming of new age. Um, Color associated yellow, stone, jade, um, which is interesting too because the water element in this is also about like jade can't sit in water, or like it'll stain, it'll degrade. Um, but it does incite flow of like love and luck and abundance and all of these beautiful things, but in a very grounded sense, not just in a drowning sense. So it's a wise use of the aspects of flow without flooding the system. which is also, I think, where Western Geminis can get very into like learning without necessarily integrating or without necessarily learning to associate what they've learned or find the synthesis in what they've learned. And going on, the elements associated would be water, flower associated, squash blossom, herb associated, corn, silk. So as nutritious, as nutrient dense, as heavy, like corn flour. As that can be, the corn silk is usable in many aspects, is much lighter, is much brighter, is much more catching of the light than the density of the flour that we can make with it. But again, like all elements, incorporated within this, not just air, it is the use, the wise use, the conscious use of these elements. Reed is the earth reflection of the star, Chakase, along with Chawatse or flint. Reed made up the magician twins who led a journey to the darkening land of the west to bring back the daughter of the sun. 7 men went along to carry the casket in which to bring her back and restore her to life. This wooden box constellation is now known as Gemini and is called Pollux of Castor and Pollux in Cherokee mythology. Reed, Cain, the agriculturist, is the creator twin, and Flint, Knifestone, Abel, Cain and Abel, got it. Who slays animals is the destroyer twin. There's also Lakota stories of the twins. There's a plethora of indigenous stories that account for these twins, and it's interesting because it's it seems to be kind of a commentary on like age old debates of nature and nurture and the choices that we make that lead to hero or misunderstood villain. Persons of this sign are intellectually keen. They can bring all the elements of the earth to bear when fighting for causes that are important to the benefit of society as a whole. They are dedicated to raising their own consciousness as well as the consciousness of all. Reed signs are tall or of sturdy build, statuesque, followers of the straight and narrow, as they see it. Key point. One who fights for principles, a crusader, who looks the facts of life squarely in the face, meditates, and comes up with a plan for dealing with the indisputable varieties, which so important because in meditation you see it so much more than just as you see it. And that is a key element. And again, in synthesis of story, to be able to consider the antipode, to be able to consider the opposite or other perspective, and not just for satire and devil's advocate, but to find some sort of right relationship or tertiary solution. Meditation is key. And Gemini can be very stubborn about that. And comes up with a plan for dealing with the indisputable verities. Not one to shirk responsibilities, labors diligently when at work, but can just as wholeheartedly enjoy life when at play. This sign is well respected by associates, both business and social, a trailblazer, an inspiring teacher, a leader with many followers, a student of human nature, master of ancient wisdom, and follower of the solemn rituals of the ancestors. Any leader who seeks followers is not a leader. They are a manipulator and not a fun one. They are a con. I think a good leader cultivates other leaders. A good leader, much like I said earlier too, with like children and asking why. Uh, the correct response is to engage in the curiosity, but also to direct that conscientiously. Um, a good leader cultivates other leaders and directs them toward their own inner authority rather than to follow in line. And that can be the difficult part about being so studious is regurgitating information rather than learning how to think for yourself. And I don't think that's any particular one sign's fault. I think that's very much a cultivation of Western academic systems that are designed for workers and soldiers, not for free thinkers. Bow, 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 bow. Hard truths, hard truths. A student of human nature, a master of ancient wisdom, and follower of the solemn rituals of ancestors. This sign has a strong mental force that probes into the interior and ferrets out the facts. Can find on the face of another person the indelibly stamped lines of character, can look into the eyes and see the mirror of the soul, calls a spade, whether or not it is used for digging. They believe that truth is a fetish that will set you free. Interesting. To be clear, the word fetish in indigenous philosophy means something very different than what it means in the West. And quite honestly, perhaps the conflation of these two things is very realistically why people fetishize indigenous knowledge and indigenous practice, and also the ways in which we covet information, which doesn't breathe life into it. It very much traps that energy. And so we get sort of cyclically controlled by misdirected desire or by an ungrounded unconscious desire. And if this person will be still and listen to the breath of the wind, they will be turned into the universal consciousness. Therein lies the font of all knowledge, of all time and all place. The reed plant was used to make blowguns and arrow shafts. It is the sign of a warrior who fights for the protection of all, for peace or for causes that are just. Such people have always been held in high esteem by other members of society. It is war of conquest that steps over the line and becomes an abomination. Bam! This sign, wait, we're just going to read that again. It is war of conquest that steps over the line and becomes an abomination. Oof. This sign advocates beating swords into plowshares, not only with words, but with action, setting an example for others. East is the psychological direction of success and happiness, no matter what the geographic route. In the metaphor of Cherokee mythology, journeys are always either to or from the East, depending on whether they are toward success or defeat. Much like even in yoga asana, traditionally you would start facing the East. If you have dabbled or played in any of my cultivated practices, I start from the west and I start from the south and I turn west so that I end east because I'm acknowledging what my body is feeling. I'm acknowledging what my body has remembered about that feeling, and I'm cultivating new energy to carry forward. So, fun facts. The infamous Trail of Tears of the 19th century will go down in folklore as a forced march from the east. Wow, wow, wow. Yeah, very literally, like a backtracking, like a misdirection, marching toward death, very literally, marching back into the memory so as to be hidden. The sign is closely associated with growth and development and change, both in Selu or corn and in humans. People were created by mixing the incarnation of the golden rays of the sun. Oh, that makes me think of Cornhusk dolls too. Absolutely. Humanity, right? People and play. People were created by mixing the incarnation of the golden rays of the sun with the saliva of the moon. Saliva, not blood, was considered by the Cherokees to be the vital fluid of the human body. Interesting. And the cornstalk is, of course, a form of cane. Salu was the mainstay of the people, the nourishment that Mother Earth provided for her children. Um, I don't know too much about the differentiation between saliva or blood as far as practice, but I can say that it is very much something that is, considered equally powerful in conjure. That it absolutely is something that holds information, that holds charge, that holds like stem cells, even um, the ways in which the saliva has been studied just in meditation's effects on it has been profound. It's maybe overlooked. It's maybe overlooked excessively. And quite honestly, in Western culture, blood is very much misused and abused, misused and abused in many ways, shapes, and forms. If you just consider the corporatization of blood banks and the ways in which they take advantage of inner city communities and people in pain and people in desperation. Blood magic is a powerful thing, but it is also, uh, we're not the only ones that know that, you know? The cornstalk is, of course, a form of cane. Salut was the mainstay of the people, the nourishment of the Mother Earth provided for her children. A strange thing about the corn plant is that it will not reseed itself and continue to grow from one season to the next without the intervention of the hand of man. Also, directly conflicting with what the Ten Commandments says, as far as like, thou shalt not plant two seeds in the same pod. The Three Sisters planting methods, that corn is very much embraced and nurtured by other plants that work well with it, and is not the only one. In fact, we learn more and more about Michael Reisel rehabilitation and relationship, and the ways in which mycelium helps facilitate these structures, and the ways in which some trees and mycelium actually require each other to grow together. In which case, both scientifically and spiritually, the Bible is wrong. The Bible is against nature. Along with a high regard for knowledge, persons of this sign have an all encompassing love affair with the great outdoors. They are tuned to the universal harmony of nature and speak a various language. They speak with all elements. They lie down and listen to blades of grass growing. They hug trees. They converse with the chipmunks. Ravens call to them. Deer come and eat from their hands. The only way they would ever shoot an animal is with a camera. A squirrel is for company, not for a fur coat. I know that's going to cause some debate because as a vegetarian, I also think that faux leathers and what have you really poison the earth much more so. And I think, granted, in this example, a squirrel isn't going to keep you warm in the winter. So perhaps there's more to be said about certain spirits that are even willing to engage or sacrifice their lives to keep us warm or to feed us, versus animals that are maybe there to teach us about play and teach us about companionship and teach us about community rather than to serve us in some way. Persons born under this sign are ambitious to a fault at whatever they set their hearts on and tend to be very conscious of their own status on the professional and social scene. They make good forest rangers, politicians, social workers, and counselors, for they communicate well and understand others. The reed or cane plant is an excellent fire starter. Reed types likewise build fires under things. They have miles to go and covenants to keep, and they can't wait all day to get started and to get others involved. In times of trial, trouble, and tribulation, it is Reed who picks up the pieces and gets things going again. There is a Jack and the Beanstalk type legend about how the people once hid deep underground to escape destruction by fire. Their return to reality was accomplished by first planting a seed. It sprouted and grew, and they all climbed up inside this hollow reed to a bright new world. When the world was destroyed by flood, it was reed rafts that floated survivors over the waters, depositing them safely on dry land. From there, the clans island hopped over the remaining puddles and finally ended up on Turtle Island. It is predicted that the next world destruction will be by earthquake. If and when this happens again, the people will look to Reed to beat a path through the Holocaust to safety. Interesting. Reed is the day sign of the modern day Moses, who leads the people away from darkness and evil and into the light of truth, the promised land, which, if you have watched my necromantic autopsy of truth, or if you have watched any of my geometry of relationships, this is again not just dark, not just light, but a tertiary truth that builds and leans on the spinal integrity of both things. In the most ontological, teleological moment of truth, which is choice, because there is no such thing as a good or bad person. And I know that's going to piss some people off, but hear me out. Good people are terrible. Good people are capable of terrible things, and bad people are capable of changing, of redemption, should they choose. And this is the big thing. Not everybody chooses to change their ways, and many are complacent in their ways, and so they assume that they are good and aren't actually enacting choices that have a positive impact on not just themselves but others. So that is very much the central point of the integrity of truth, of choice in any of these things. And much like the twin serpents wind around, there's many a nuance to health and healing, but a symbol that many a doctor or medic or EMT wears is a Gemini symbol of understanding that nuance, that duality, and their responsibility to, yes, maintaining life, but also to humanity and death. The shadow dance of the reed before driving hard and fast to the finish line. Be sure you're running toward the right goalpost. There is also danger in becoming too rigid, of falling in love with the sound of your own voice instead of taking a broad, common sense point of view. There is the hazard of becoming self righteous, overconfident, and egotistical. At the same time, self confidence and courage are essential to a person who moves into the unknown and leads others on uncharted pathways. Read people are high achievers who have an obsession with success, but when the fire burns too hot, it leads to burnout. Usually, there are built in checks and balances, and when these fail, it is a good idea to have at least one ear open to the advice of associates. We can't do it alone, dear. The answer is balance. Keep in mind that too little too late and too much too soon are equally destructive. Sit on the fence a while every now and then to look both ways, but don't get hung up there. And don't get pushed off one side or the other against your will, dear. That is also a integral and key component. Um, what's up, my friends? Welcome. It's so good to see you. Beyond just Teleki or Cherokee astrology as the Panther or the Reed, in Mexica astrology, Toltec Azteca, would be the serpent or the seed, which is interesting and something that I've said before is both of these modalities in the Seers Codex overlay perfectly and in fact create a golden angle that weaves these things together and even have repetitive signs. I've noticed this pattern as well with Egyptian astrology and with Irish indigenous or Gaelic astrology, as well as many others, I'm sure, that I have yet to test my theories on. But so far they're passing with flying colors. Um, and so there was already an allusion to the seed. There was already an allusion to the ways in which the seed is hidden potential and is long term growth and is very much about the potential for new, for becoming, and the paths that it can open up or lead, much like a seed splits when it finally sprouts. And also the ways in which it needs multiple resources, elemental resources, to be able to actually cultivate. Sure, the seed is like material. Um, so maybe we won't look at that, but like soil as earth, it requires water to be hydrated, to break down the skin, the hard skin of the seed. It also requires oxygen because plants breathe our CO2 and soak up nutrients in the same ways that we inhale and exhale, soak up nutrients from its surrounding sources, and requires, like germinating seeds, especially in nurseries, require heating elements to some degree. And so all elements are present yet again. The serpent that is here is also something that I have noticed a similar vein, a uniting vein in Chinese astrology, in Taoist stories of the immortal serpent and as teachers, and were much like in Mexica astrology. depicted as feathered serpents or as birds and serpents. And over time, were very much, I don't want to say diluted, but they began to wear different masks. We'll say that. And so the feathered serpent uh, and its great significance, or Quetzalcoatl, in Mexica understandings and stories, um, is something that is, again, expansive elements. It is not just the slithering serpent in the earth. It is not just the fire that is often associated with the serpent or water that's associated with the serpent. It also encompasses air. So that kind of gives us like a direct quality back into Western astrology, but draws it out into multiple deltas, multiple innervations of the elements that are present in this, which is why the cycle of harmonies, as far as a breathing modality, has been so thorough, so helpful in cleansing all of the elements and in directing fire consciously. Um, Opposing nodes of this are interesting because it would be the dragon or the jaguar. Jaguar, very similar to panther. So we have this reflective element again, like Gemini looking into a mirror. But also the feathered serpent is maybe one of the oldest stories or representations of the dragon and the many energies and paths that can be cleared with such a powerful and misunderstood and present but hidden in plain sight energy. And so, my friends, with all of this knowledge, let us breathe, pull some cards, offer some gifts of wisdom or recognition to Gemini, and see just how this solar season affects the rest of us. Because we're going through all signs, I will say that rather than breathe through every single one, because we'll be here forever and my headphones will probably die, we'll take 3 deep breaths for Gemini, and then that will set the tone for everybody, as is intended. And if you'll notice, like I do take a minute to breathe with the cards each pull, but for sake of everybody's time, we'll keep those initial 3 breaths as the most potent in for Gemini. So happy birthday, love. All right, loves. Much like we are hanging out, and much like there are cards between us, because there are. We're going to take 3 deep breaths. All I ask of you is to open your body to the fullest breath you can find and to open your awareness to any sensations that may arise. Take a deep breath in and exhale. Take a deep breath in and exhale. Take a deep breath in and exhale. remember what the book had said about like if left untethered, the energy turns into like chauvinistic and something else. What I'm feeling is a lot of action, a lack of communication. And it said something too about like rather than talking about it, Gemini is more about action. But that can only go so far. That can also lead to a lot of impulse or lack of impulse control. That can lead to a lot of impulsivity and lack of impulse control. When you're not able to communicate what it is you are doing, it is because you do not fully understand what you are doing. And for sure, it's hard to like narrate while you're doing, right? Um, there are a lot of people that like narrate while they're moving or talk to themselves in some way because it's helpful to process information. It's helpful to unite these ends of what is thinking and what is doing. And that is something that I think is maybe misunderstood, underwhelmed, utilized, or altogether lacking in Western understandings of Gemini. Um, it it lacks ability to communicate with the mind what is actually happening or impulsive, or is the reason for action, but also our ability to communicate it to other people. Which what did I say about teaching too? Like regurgitating knowledge is not knowledge. Regurgitating information is not knowledge, nor is it wisdom. It is very far from. And this is something that I think is reoccurring in that because if you maybe know how to act on something, but fail to be able to both explain it to your internal locus and also be able to uh, narrate or explain it to any external witness, means you don't really know or are lacking some integral understanding that unites these things. Which quite honestly maybe is like maybe it's lacking consciousness or maybe it's lost in lack of purpose because everything has a rhyme and a reason, and much like even spirits or animals or elements has a rhyme or a reason and a role. And so we cannot let things go by the wayside just because we do not see value in them superficially or because we do not see value in them immediately. Um, in a very real way, I think there's like intensity and there's pressure, and maybe that calls us to move forward a lot faster, but not in a firm footing. We need to also cultivate, if you consider, like the masculine aspect of our energy is the like go, 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 move, 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 let's do this, and the feminine aspect of our energy or communication with our heart or communication with our intuition is very much that feminine power standing behind our action that influences and guides us. And so when we sacrifice one for the other, we lose a lot of firmness, we lose a lot of stability, we lose a lot of embodied action in that. And so, like the book said too, like take a minute, sit on the fence. You don't have to jump off. Nobody's pushing you off. And maybe that's like an external motivation that pushes us to move too quickly before we have all of the information that we really feel we need or want, or before we have all the information to reasonably use the tools of our own elements, our own energy, rather than jumping to conclusions. And much like the book said, leading to self-righteousness. Who is self-righteous? Like priests and pimps and politicians, and they often are puppets moving for somebody else's dime and with gain in mind, often sacrificing many for it. Um, or even like parents that don't have the answers but take it out on the child because they failed to ask themselves integral questions and instead repeated processes, Kind of like in a lot in a lot of Latin families, newer generations that are like, hey, I think I have depression, and the old school families are like, what? That doesn't exist, even though it's been right in front of their faces, like present but very hidden at the same time, and like in what is it, Encanto, like don't talk about Bruno kind of thing. And that is antithetical to knowledge. That is antithetical to information and to sharing or growing or expanding in information. So consider that, consider all of those feelings, and ultimately just take a breath, notice how your body feels, and listen. That feeling itself is not the totality of your experience, but it is a sensation that is telling you something. Much like I talk about in geometry of relationships too. What triggers you isn't like an inherently bad thing. It is a sign of something rubbing against your truth. And when you are more clear about what your truth is, it will become more clear what is not, and what that friction is, and why that friction is, rather than having to pick any one side to sacrifice another, any one side of yourself to sacrifice another. Bam! Eight of Spades. Eight of Spades, Nine of Hearts. Interesting. Okay. Eight of Spades, much like an Eight of Swords. So we do have a lot of air quality. We also do have a lot of sharp objects and a lot of corners and a lot of boundaries. And quite honestly, I think in the ways maybe we feel attacked, sorry. But also it is for a lack of perception. Is it really attacking, or is it sensitivity, or is it, sometimes the ways in which we can spin a story and it gets out of hand. Um, and it is much more about our perception to it. We find a lot more freedom and space in the body and in the nervous system and in the mind and in reality when, again, much like the book said, when you can see things from other people's point of view. And that is also from the point of view that is willing to challenge yourself. There's a side of us that's willing to challenge ourselves, but also willing to nurture us and hold ourselves. Um, that side of you does not mean you ill will. That side of you means to help you grow. It means to help you sort of distill your truth and distill where it is that you stand, so that you know it in its potency, so that it has a potent charge, rather than you just be beheads to the capacity or that which you are connected to. The charge that you bring to the table is a very powerful one. Don't let the materialism or the this or that of, wall and outlet, or, you know, charge and battery, or, plug and capacitor dictate the ways in which you see or the ways in which you move. Um, there is an incredible darkness and an incredible light here. And this darkness is very much a cyclical blindness, even in the ways in which eight perpetuates. It's a mind fire, it's a mind cycle. It's the ways in which we ruminate and churn, but maybe never really like try anything different or learn anything new. Like, what do they say? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result is like a way to define insanity. The Nine of Hearts is a reminder of the natural fulfillment that is inherent in such a potent capacity. However, it shows up inverted. So it is very much the ways in which we have ourselves and seek rather than embody. And that is the lack of impulse control in seeking relief without release, and seeking fulfillment without embodiment. And it's not that far, like it's not that far off. Um, so if this is, again, if this is kind of triggering, sorry. But this is also a promise that it's not that far off. You don't have to look outside of you. You do have to look within you and remind yourself of your dichotomous capacity, especially as Mercury will be in its own dichotomy. What parts of you are present but ignored, or you're vibrant but ignored, or what parts of you are very present but hidden or hiding in some way, shape, or form, because those are the places where you'll find more happiness. Which is interesting too, because what did I say in the beginning? Gemini is my South Node, and like, can't hide from that. Can't hide from that. Like, I procrastinated all I wanted. But I can't hide from that. And so, in coming to that, there is a new light of understanding. It is all mind and it is all heart. So, truly utilize the breath to clear the mind and to really feel the location of your heart and the ways in which it expands in your body. Even in meditation, maybe this would be more akin to like not just elemental breathing, but in deeper meditation, what it means to find love in the body. And in a very real way, your average human will say that love is found in directly in the heart, like it sits there, lives there, or in the genitals. Both are false, I would say. I think that's a very diluted and materialistic perspective when love is an expansive frequency, in which case and it's also an ancient truth, in which case where would it more likely be but in the nervous system, one of the oldest, most evolved parts about us. And that is more than just a mind. It is so much more than just the mind, because the brain is fed by the nervous system. So we're putting too much pressure on our thinking and ignoring the feeling, when in reality, the two require each other. The two need each other. A little scissor action. The two very much need each other and should not be sort of subordinated for its lack of literal quality. Damn, facts. Gemini, oh Gemini. I hope that brings you some ease and also some solace and perhaps even some validation. And if it disturbed or triggered you in any way, I hope it only shakes up truth and pulls that information and that knowing to the surface. Ooh. All right, Cancer, let's move. Woo. Cancer, Cancer, Cancer. Oh, interesting. Okay, lovely. Lovely. Which Cancer in indigenous astrology would more likely be death of a rattlesnake tooth, poison, and the afterlife. Um, but as we know, the difference between medicine and poison is simply in the dose. So Three of Hearts here, I think, expands on this idea of impulse control, um, because even Cancer energy is not just water, but it is the fire of water. It is the root of this expansiveness, much like lava or magma in the Earth's core, or what we've come to find about Jupiter even. that it does have these multiple phase states and does have this core, but is various states of hydrogen relationships, so it's very watery still. Heated water, hot springs, even. Um, Three of Hearts is the ways in which we communicate this. I think cancers are very, known to be very emotional in Western astrology, but quite honestly, I think equally known to be very repressive of their emotions, and to struggle with the intensity or actually holding their emotions in some way, shape, or form. And that is not to be confused with embodying. Your emotions don't have to become the totality of your experience. Uh, Much like vertigo is a sensation of spinning without actually spinning. That is the nuance that cancer energy would do themselves a great favor to understand. That would be a more grounded truth. Ace of Diamonds, that would be a more grounded truth. Ace of Diamonds, calling card, wish card, but also like even in blackjack, it is one, it is also 11, and that is identity, and that is also the reflection of identity. Rather than much like I've experienced with cancers, feeling like ultimately at odds with themselves when their emotions are not like they're used to, or when their emotions change, it becomes such such an intense flip or inversion rather than a direct one-to-one ratio, if that makes sense. Um, and even in the concept of one-to-one ratio, this stimulus does not equate this feeling. Quite honestly, we get more curious, investigate these things. Just because you're having a bad day doesn't mean you're a terrible person and that the world is falling apart and the sky is falling. It does mean, maybe there's some things to reevaluate. Maybe that is the ways in which you notice, like, okay, well, I didn't do this, and I went to sleep late, and I you know ate even later, and so I didn't sleep well, and so me feeling shitty isn't a reflection of how terrible I am, but it is a reflection of, let me not forget how important these things are and how grounded these things make me feel. Quite honestly, I think when it comes to heavy, dense, heated water energy, regulation skills are important. And that is how we dilate time and draw out the experience of, not draw it out, but expand the sensation so that we can really allow for the true feeling to come up. I see this a lot with people where they conflate the sensation or the impulse with the feeling, with the action. So we've lost a third step, or we lost the middle step entirely, and people are like, I'm angry, and so my feeling is revenge, and that's not a feeling, that's an action. That is very literally the action that we take with it. And so much like even in this Gemini reading, the action without the communication is that. And so it leads us into very quick, very impulsive, very destructive choices when we could have just as easily stopped, taken a breath, figured out where this feeling was, what it looked like, what it really wanted. Because most often, anger is wearing the mask of that feeling, and underneath it is abandonment and loneliness and, the ways in which, sadness and memory can fuel depression or what have you. Um, Much like even jealousy. Um, And that is not to say that people don't fuck with us and deliberately try to make us jealous, but the feeling of jealousy is not just jealousy outright, but is this mask facilitating the experience of, challenging identity, of challenging our sense of self-worth. And so when this jealousy feeling arises, what's underneath it is like, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not skinny enough, or whatever. And the ways in which we idealize and compare. And there are, because of that, rather than give in to these jealous impulses and maybe act out of character, we can investigate those things. And I've said for years, like the antidote to that is like, okay, we've identified what we feel we're lacking. Now we have the information we need to move toward what we want to do. If I'm feeling jealous because so and so smarter than me, so and so, you know, is more talented or whatever, um, then dope. Now I know that information, and now I know what I know what I want to learn more about. Let me engage more in my research and my education. Let me engage more in my hobbies. Let me engage more in the things that build my reality before that reality and identity was challenged. And that is a grounding element in the mind, body, spirit, in the ways in which mind, body, spirit is yes the three and does make this sort of like tertiary triangular geometry of relationship. But if you consider in a conjuring or in the space in between, we are not each side, we are not each angle, but we are the total area of the triangle, in which case that is the dimensional quality, where that triangle turns from two-dimensional into a tetrahedron or into a pyramid-like structure, which is an energy conductor, which is something with an expansive frequency that people seek, that people want to be around, not that people feel destroyed by, or that people feel that they are a casualty to. Breathe into your heart and breathe very groundingly, which, if you know the cycle of Harmonies and earth breath, goes a long way. Mhm. What's next? Leo? Leo. Wow. Something about this is moving very rapidly, very fast. Go figure. Go figure. Isn't Jupiter moving into Leo too? Not immediately, but it's carrying that energy over to it, that's for sure. As will Venus. And that has less to do with superficiality or posturing or presentation, and more to do with the ways in which we feel more deeply and the memories attached to that feeling. Ah, oh, hello. Okay. Nine of diamonds, 10 of clubs. Nine of diamonds, 10 of clubs. Between a rock and a hard place, up against the wall. Intensity. Intensity tends to make us act out. Intensity tends to make us push back. And again, sort of out of desperation. All action, no communication is an act of desperation. Um, Not an act of integrity, but an act of desperation. Nine of diamonds, 10 of clubs. And so this nine of diamonds is very firm, very solid objects. But I don't get the sense of it necessarily being fulfilling because of this 10 of wands. And that's not to say that it can't. I do think that's absolutely a converse. where perhaps, we're very much feeling like our ducks are in a row, we're very much feeling like things are in line, and that level of excitement and that also need for more. That when we have, everything we want and we still feel very unfulfilled, when we've succeeded and accomplished, and now rather than let her hair down and be proud like a lion or Leo would, the intense pressure of like, but what next? But you have to prove yourself to somebody else. But that's still not enough for mom and dad at home or what have you. That I think is a very heavy weight and pressure. And quite honestly, much like dense, humid air, difficult to breathe in. And so for all of the natural fire energy that is in Leo in more ways than one. This is very much earth and the ways in which we ground that fire, not the ways in which we fucking flamethrower it all around us. Um, in which context, even it's like, people come to like moths to the flame, people come to the barbecue, people come to sacred fire. They come to ceremony rather than us have to perform or seek it or, bring it to everybody in the sense of like, look at me, constantly seeking validation or constantly seeking approval, or constantly feeling like, just one more compliment will make you feel more valid or fulfilled. Um, Unfortunately, it really has the opposite effect. And will continue to have the opposite effect, I think, until ultimately we feel the flame is expunged and we feel very drained and we feel very vacuous, like a void, more so than a void of entropy, but more like a black hole, just sucking all that energy into it. Um, and it, vanishing into thin air because of that, it not actually equating to anything and not having any particulate matter to it. And so don't get caught in materialism. And, I mean that likewise with the pressure. Don't get caught in the materialism of pressure. Don't give too much weight to the pressure of posturing or posterity, um, or the ways in which we pose. Yes, that can be fun and that can be beautiful and absolutely, but have fun with it or it becomes very rigid. And that's very much this nine of diamonds too. Have fun with it or it becomes very rigid. Have fun with it and like real fun, especially with summer. I feel like this is the way in which people like do too much so fast and then they're burnt the fuck out. And realistic, like your average person goes out, party, 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 party. Are any of those people really your friends? Probably not. And so it can feel like a lot of stuff, but none of it really matters. None of it really equates to anything. Let that not be like an existential crisis or void either. Let it be an opportunity to reanalyze what it is you're feeling, what it is you're moving toward, and what it is you're moved by. Because fire doesn't like to be moved by other people, especially when we only identify with that. But what moves fire? Wind, communication, connection, grounding breaths, nostril breaths, and directed fire breaths, which is focus, which is awareness, which is perhaps a deeper internal awareness and a deeper, more precise, or more well known, more familiar inner locus. It doesn't have to be like precise, like as in one point, but familiar, that inner garden, like to know what love feels like in you, to know what satisfaction feels like in you, and the ways in which it spreads, not the ways in which it just sits in our hips with our trauma. And in fact, that's more of an indication that is a sensation more closely attached with trauma than it is satisfaction. Virgo, my dear, how are we feeling? Hmm. Okay. I kind of saw this coming. A lot of excitement, a lot of fire, a lot of clarity, a lot of new endeavors, but also maybe again a lot of pressure, a lot of weight to some degree. A Virgo friend of mine is starting school, so I was like, excitement makes sense. But also, yeah, there's a lot of pressure in that too, a lot of pressure to perform. Absolutely. Healthy to some degree, healthy to some degree up until we hit perfection. Practice doesn't make perfect, practice makes familiarity. And I say this all the time in regards to like artwork or creative work. How familiar are you with the medium that you're working with? Your familiarity with the way that its own consciousness and rhythm works will always influence your work. And so, knowing that, like you would know a familiar friend, only advances and expands your work rather than constantly engaging in, control and in spite of familiarity with said medium. Uh, Ultimately leads to frustration. And so 6 of clubs inverted, 8 of clubs ignited. And that is less of a tangible, less of a physical building, um, maybe even less of the ways that you are concerned with performance or concerned with the statistics of performance, but the ways in which you identify with your curiosity, the ways in which you identify with your compassion, with your perspective, even, and the ways in which that perspective is something uniquely yours and something that is also a growing conscientious thing with you. We do not stay stagnant, we are always growing toward one direction or another. Even bacteria grows. Um, Even, rot and mold grows. So we are never stagnant. We are always, moving in one direction or moving in another. We are optimizing beauty and balance, or we are compounding on the lack thereof. Perhaps that is an element of pressure in and of its own, and the ways in which we rush and the ways in which speed moves fast or light moves fast. Um, Thank you. But I do think that this 8, yes, a mind cycle, is also a safe, can be a safe space with which to create, to conjure, to be curious in. Much like the octagon and its geometry is sacred across multiple cultures, as this space of creation, as this sort of 8-sided, geometric doorway through many a thing. And when we allow our minds to be more expansive in that, when we allow our feelings even to move through us with no judgment, then we're able to really unearth what those feelings really want and where they actually want to go. So rather than get angry and put our fucking fist through a wall, we, are curious about the sensation. We are curious about the feeling and are able to identify it more clearly. Clear sight, like for all the fire here, that can be very clear sight. If you consider, um, like the hottest point of the flame as inspiration, and also the peripheral of the flame as this sort of like clear and charged sight. We do not have to dive into the flame to still feel the capacity of it. So let us not lose ourselves in these ideals of perfectionism either. Don't forget to play. And don't forget to know why you got started in whatever endeavor it is in the first place. Because chances are it had much more, curious or creative component to it than just the rigidity or the structuring or the perfectionism that we're often held to. A lot of us love learning. We just don't like being judged, and we don't like being graded by people that are often just as in contempt of the system in some way. Um, I think in perhaps a mundane way too. It's the ways in which we, would clear our desk so that we can start a new project. Um, to put our emotions in order, to get very, again, clear about the inspirations and the initial components of any endeavor, allows for a more clear path with which through to work, allows for a more clear understanding of the tools that you're going to use in this work, rather than it just be, you know, just be anger, or just be rage, or just be a neediness to learn, because that can, then we lose the creativity or the curiosity of learning, and it becomes status, um, or likewise, in political movements, like, yes, we channel that sacred rage into something conducive to the kind of world that we want to live in, into something that is, beneficial to the community, rather than just destroy, destroy, destroy. Because the anger itself is not the totality of the experience. It is asking for curiosity so as to offer insight. And that's the beauty of learning too. That's the beauty of learning our own fire, is asking, where does this come from and where does it go? The teleological inspirations of what makes us is a beautiful thing. And that is a freeing thing, a liberating thing, rather than the rigidity that is often associated with Virgo, um, which, like, yes, for sure. I'm sure they love, you know, sharp angles and fine lines, um, but more so than just compartmentalization, because compartmentalization will drive you mad. And that is very clear in this too, because these are two elements, but in different or same element, but different capacities, right? Or different directions, even one's internal, one's external. Um, we don't need to compartmentalize those experiences. We can synthesize those experiences. I've said often, and I'll say it again, I don't think compartmentalization is a valuable skill. I don't think multitasking beyond belief is a valuable skill. Quite honestly, I think it's part of what drives society so mad. Um, Constantly multitasking doesn't allow your nervous system time to regulate, doesn't allow you to actually take in all of the information or all of the experience. And then you're processing, one thing while also doing another, and the mind's everywhere. And the body is not actually able to hold the experience. Um, and I think, in work and schooling, the compartmentalization, this rigid compartmentalization, uh, is a way in which we sacrifice part of the self, for what benefit? I don't know. For status, really, for status and appeasement, which is not a reason to do anything. direct the fire, and also cultivate it deeply. If you've ever done cycle of harmonies with me, that initial inhale and the fire breath is like expansive heart flames, and then we direct it like a laser. We do not let it just burn and run amok. Libra, what will you show us today? Hmm. Interesting narrative already. Huh. Oh, okay. Interesting. Interesting. So what I meant by that interesting narrative already is the ways in which, like cards want to stick or flip or what have you, and considering the way Libra could very much be kind of this pseudo antipode in energies, or the twin of the twin, essentially. Um, I think sets a tone, sets and shifts toward a new paradigm, and those are big moves. And sure enough, what do I draw? The Jack of Spades, the Queen of Hearts, which are big moves, integral moves, but also perhaps commentary on the wide gaps between our mind and our heart. And also, look at how beautiful those colors are together. The natural kinship that occurs between these understandings. Um, the mind is also throughout the body. If you consider that the mind is not just the brain, the mind is also directed by the nervous system, and the nervous system is also in your pinky toe. The nervous system is very concentrated in the bottom of the foot, actually, also very concentrated in the tip of the finger, the extraneous limbs in general. But it's expansive. It's also in the body. Like this, the body keeps a score. The ways in which trauma rests in the body, or is stored in the body. The ways in which memory is stored in the body. The ways in which memory is stored in cellular body and in DNA. The mind is so much more than just the brain. And I think this is something that science is also, much like I said was going to happen with the 13 moons reading, as the year began to unfold before us, the ways in which we're coming to understand consciousness. And it is much more than the mind. There are scientists that are keeping donated brains alive, which, like, I don't know how ethical it really is. I'm pretty sure that when anybody is willing to donate their body after death, is not assuming that their brain's going to be dismembered and kept alive just to feed it drugs and see what happens. I'm pretty sure nobody would elect that kind of treatment posthumously. Um, or the ways in which organoid computers are this alternative to AI, this efficient alternative to AI, and it's lab grown stem cell brains, and again arguments about whether or not it is conscious, um, as if the patterning and cycling of learning with the eights that keep showing up in here isn't a process of consciousness in and of itself, in the ways in which we can churn, not the ways in which we regurgitate. And so this Jack of Spades inverted, and this Queen of Spades, this Queen of Hearts inverted, is very much the inner world of identity and of consciousness, the expansiveness of the mind and the ways in which the heart fuels it and feeds it. And not just in a like old school pumping blood through the whole system. No, the heart is also lined with neurological cells. The heart is also this weaving vortex of tissue that feels so much more deeply than just in that spot. Like when our heart is broken, it affects our whole mood, it affects our whole body, it affects our muscles, it affects everything. Or when we're excited, and we get jittery and we get shaky and the eyes get wide and we get flushed in the cheeks. When we're flirty, and the ways in which we respond to that in body temperature and goosebumps and playing with our hair and whatever. The heart is also deeply expansive, and if you consider it's like two webs weaving perfectly together, like multiple toroidal functions expanding within each other. And this is, yes, absolutely happening within you. There's also the ways in which we can find more relation in the world around us, because the world around us and every object and its energy has its spirit and its frequency and also communicates with that. But when we are not aligned in this context, we have trouble really meeting those relationships or being able to receive them in some way, shape, or form. For instance, kind of going back to Cancer, like feeling so much and equating action with that, or going kind of back to Gemini, even um, over intellectualizing to oh wait, I mixed those up. Over intellectualizing to a place of self-righteousness, or feeling so deeply and so impulsively that it costs other frequencies their space and time, which is not in right relationship. Think of it like, like a DJ spinning two records. It doesn't work if one's just drowning the other one out. That's not a mix. Might as well just listen to a playlist. And a playlist player is arguably, to a lot of people, not necessarily a DJ. But perhaps that's a hill that you're willing to die on. Um, it's very expansive. It's high octaves. So as much as I want to say like air breath and heart breath, those two, and like for sure, if you just want to do those from the cycle of harmonies, open your eyes and open your feelings to the relationship that those two things have. Open your eyes and open your feelings and sensations to, much like initially with breath. Open your body to the deepest breath you can find. Open your awareness to any sensations that arise. It is the conscientiousness with which we breathe. It is, these deeper meditations weave a story, they tell a story. Even in hypnosis, it actualizes a story in your mind and in your visceral body. And that is something that I think would be very becoming for this kind of energy, rather than to just simplify. Although never underestimate even the smallest efforts, because big changes are a coming. Thank you, Libra. Thank you, Libra. Da, 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 da. Scorpio. Let's see. Let's see. It is interesting that all of these energies like very much relate, but all the cards kind of seem like the interpretation or the perception of each of these energies, though they definitely relate, kind of feel like they're in their own island, or very much in their own experience of reality. So there's kind of like a separation, a segregation of these energies that happen. And quite honestly, I know that when people do these all signs readings, people will fast forward to their sign and, that's it. And I generally think that's a very poor way to do it. Um, Most of us are working from a Western charting system, right? So fuck your sun sign, fuck your moon sign, fuck your rising sign. Like I said, Vedic astrology, um, your Venus is more akin to your rising sign. In which case, what I tell people all the time is you'll learn a lot more about yourself if you are looking at a Western chart when you look at your Mars and your Venus, and when you understand the relationship that exists there, especially if they are if seem entirely antithetical or opposing, but also especially if they seem like they're both in the same house or what have you. That does not necessarily simplify that energy. It can be very nuanced. And the reason, and I call this a cycle of harmonies, or why the breath that we do is a cycle of harmonies, is because it is clearing and cleansing and encompassing of all elements and their relationship to, and expanding obviously beyond the four into the ether and into that also expands us outside of, takes us well beyond 12 signs. That it is the synthesis of these relationships, much like, we don't just exist with only C notes on the keyboard. We still can make chords with other notes that maybe we wouldn't have thought to use, that seem polarizing, but are in fact add more depth to identity of that sound. And so I do think it's very helpful to go through all of them, because even if you don't have a planet in one of those energies, that doesn't mean that there's no energy there. In fact, that probably means that there's a little bit more attention that is required, because much like, again, Mercury and dichotomy incoming, or the new moon, the dark moon, it is very present, but it is hidden. And so let's see what Scorpio has to say. Beautiful. Ah, beautiful. Beautiful. The depths of our intuition, my dear. Because the Two of Swords is guardians of the gates of our inner world, but also the passageway of these things. This Two of Swords, if you think, is like the pillars that are at the sides of the High Priestess in the imagery of tarot, right? Um, and so that is the firmness with which we pass our identity through any threshold, and also the ways in which we carry our imagination through from this world to another. And that is also true of intuition. And unfortunately, I actually think that's, especially as I'm saying this now, maybe that's exactly why people struggle to really interpret or understand or locate, or be able to actually discern, what is their intuition and what is impulse. And it is because in this gate, in this doorway, this threshold into our inner world, we're more often than not operating so externally, so materialistically, so much from this outside dimension, this outside flattened simulation of a dimension, that we're almost expecting that reality to also be present here, when very much the opposite is true. When very, very much the opposite is true. Um, the external world is not how we locate or how we find or how we become more familiar with the practice of intuition. But by deeply entering through that threshold with an open mind, with open curiosity, with a light ahead of us, and with a deep satisfaction of self, not to be self satisfied, but in self knowing. But in self knowing, this is also why occultism repeats over and over again: know thyself, know thyself, know thyself. Because when you know yourself, you are not subject to external laws. When you know yourself, you are not subject to other people's interpretations or perceptions because you know yourself. People could think I'm a total asshole. I know the kindness in my heart. So let their comments not dissuade me from my own truth or knock me off my own truth, right? Um, much like we talked about with Gemini too, and being sort of on the fence and directed one way or another. Um, we can carve a hole in that fence so that everybody can just pass through as they'd like. Or much like serpents in their burrows, we dig a hole underneath, right? And then we have, altogether a new passage of our own devising, of our own creation, of our own creativity. This is what leads you to intuition. It is not only intuition, and I feel like that's where a lot of like New Age spirituality is getting hung up too. Is they are hung up on their self righteousness. They're very much hung up synthesizing the external world with the internal world. That's why so many people are lost in AI and looking to AI for direction, which, like, quite honestly, it's not accurate. It's just not always accurate. I do think sometimes it just likes to tell you exactly what you want to hear. And if you consider the ways in which it's learned from business plans. So it's a master at manipulation. It's a master at manipulation of language and the semantics of it. And so the more that we can be aware of the subtle tonalities of the self, the more clear that ringing is in our ears and not the ringing around us. Not all the chatter, not all the noise, not all the static. Yeah. Excuse. A light in the darkness, really, which is the capacity to create in pure imagination. And realistically, anatomically, the eyes are, yes, wired to receive light and send it to the brain from the outside in. But the third eye, which is also very much anatomically true and located inside of you, also has photoreceptors. So it receives light from an internal locus as well. It receives light from the inside out as well. And that will illuminate so many more options and pathways for you. Will illuminate so many options and pathways for you in understanding. And quite honestly, this is exactly why I abandoned Western astrology. Like, for sure, very much grew up loving it. And there was a switch in signs for myself at some point in time as well, where I remember just in newspapers, I was like, "What? When did that happen? I don't buy it. I don't believe it." Um, and then there was like, is Pluto a planet or not? Da 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 da. Um, and now we're learning so many more things about planets and moons and energies and da 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 da. But much like again with Gemini, on one side of the fence or the other, Libra or Scorpio. The 13th sign in astrology, or Ophiuchus, that would give us more complete mathematical innovation into 20 sign astrology and indigenous modalities, or in ancient modalities, is, I think, and I would argue, though Western occultists have stated and written that Ophiuchus is in between Libra and Scorpio, I would argue that Ophiuchus exists on the fence of any cusp because there's always this friction between that and in people when they are cusping something. or when they find themselves even in relation with people that are so closely on that fence with them, when rather than that be tension and friction, let that be a doorway to a whole new reality, in which case Ophiuchus is a paradigm shifter. For a while, I thought, like, oh, for sure, it's in between Libra and Scorpio. And then I thought, oh, wait, maybe it's in between Pisces and Aries. And then the more I studied, I realized that it's actually uh, perhaps just as nuanced as the idea of choice and building relationships. And so at any given intersection, there's the opportunity for expansion and integrity and synthesis even of those energies rather than rejection of. And that opens up entirely new pathways and entirely new understandings, and perhaps even deeper understandings as to, why this energy triggers us, or why this element seems to be lacking more often than not, or what elements can be used to help cultivate a more balanced reality, et cetera, et cetera. And it illuminates a whole different path. In which case, uh, rather than being stuck in one idea, or longing for a different idea, uh, to synthesize and to illuminate a new path altogether. Much like I say, even with crossroads, it's not even about choosing which path to go. Often it's a false choice, but it is about our presence and our integrity, and the ways in which we conjure upright in that intersection of roads. Air breath, mind breath, fire breath, clear the mind and allow for inspiration to take root rather than assumption or preconceived notion. Rad. All right, Sagittarius. How are we feeling, dear? Ooh, hell yeah. Hell yeah. Oh, okay. All right. Okay. King of Hearts, Five of Diamonds. Interesting, because Western Sagittarius is often associated with fire. However, in indigenous astrology, it would be more akin to a grounded flame, like a hearth, like a meeting place, like the fireplace in the home, like a meal for the family to come together, right? For all ideas to come together. Again, a synthesis of ideas, not just necessarily, you know, learning the best modality or learning how to be better than everything else. Again, self-righteousness. This is the wars of religions as the one true when there is really no such thing. Because much like we've all heard, there's many sides to any one story. Um, and that's not to say that it is untrue. That is to say that there's a synthesis of recall and details, right? Um, and perspectives, even honestly, even within ourselves. Sometimes shit that we felt real strongly about 5 years, 10 years later, we look back and we're like, oh, wow, why was I so intense about that when it really wasn't all that, or really wasn't that important? Gosh, we can all say that we've been there with like an ex or something, or like an ex fuck boy or fuck girl kind of situation. We're like, damn, it's silly to look back at how, you know, thrown off I was, or hurt I was, or what have you. Or it's silly to look back and think that that really offended me, or that that really wooed me or won me over, right? So rather than just fire and just, clearing or direction, or just, the length of the arrow or the speed of the arrow. Uh, the I mean, even very literally in the way that that is shot, like the grounding of the body, the structure of the body very much gives you like a firm force with which to pull back on, without hurting the self, without fucking up your flight of arrow, right? And so King of Hearts, very much pulling back into the heart, into the internal world again, very much aware of the nuance and sensation, but also the ways in which it weaves or ties to other things, again, well beyond impulse, but the things that light you up the most. The things that light you up the most. And again, outside of status, outside of posturing, outside of perception. Sometimes the things that we do to be perceived a certain way are not the things that make us feel most fulfilled, or not the things that make us feel most grounded, right? And Five of Diamonds is what we intend to create with that space. If we're willing to let all of these doubts and worries and woes and what have you come to the table, because we're willing to hear them out and not judge them and not just blow right through them because, Machiavellian tendency, we're just going to get what we want and how we want it, and, no holds barred kind of bullshit. Um, which, again, dark triad narcissism, Machiavellian tendencies is but one aspect of that. So again, not inherently evil to manipulate circumstances or to, be means justified to an end, but we lose the fucking plot in that, right? And the Five of Diamonds is the plot, because we have very much like the square, right? But much like I was talking about with I don't remember what reading it was, but the geometry of a triangle, and that central point in the triangle elevates beyond, and that's where we get kind of this dimensional space in between. Um, the three begets the four, begets the five of creation, absolutely. Um, and that's actually like the construction of proper pyramid, not just the tetrahedron. It is the plot. It is the plot. And what do we fill that plot with? That is integrity, that is motivation, that is root source, that is root fire, that is the nourishment that sits upon the table that we feed friend and foe with. Because in terms of ourself, let us not make an enemy out of any aspect of ourself. And in terms of outside, I'm sure some of you have heard me say before that the best way to defeat your adversary. The best way to conquer your enemy is to conquer your animosity against them. And that does not necessarily mean you got to be best friends with your abuser at all. Absolutely not. Um, you can still cut that off and cut that out. But that does mean that what the body remembers of it and how you find liberation from that density, that weight in the heart and in the body, is in being able to see from a wider perspective. And for a lot of people, that's like internal family systems and seeing it from your child perspective and your adult perspective and being able to create a synthesis in between. Um, and quite honestly, it's an incredible like mental and emotional exercise to see it from the other person's perspective as well. As challenging as that may be, some of my greatest epiphanies with trauma, with adversary, with abusers has been stepping into that perspective, trying to step into their eyes, I suppose, um, and seeing what surfaces and seeing what comes up. And quite honestly, even with like abusive families, you never have to talk to them again. You don't have to, call them up and be like, I'm sorry, I forgive you. Let's talk about it. But you can go into meditation, or you can, go into your journal, go into your safe, cozy space and consider possibilities. And it freed me from a lot of density, and a lot of holding of ill-willed memories, to consider that even the worst people to me were doing them the best that they could with the information that they had. It just so happens that their best was the worst for the situation, and it just so happens that the information they had was severely lacking. And quite honestly, I think we can say that for a lot of situations where our parentals or elders or grandparents didn't necessarily have the trauma resources or the therapy resources, mental health resources, or um, in abusive relationships didn't necessarily have the resources to turn to make a safe escape or to get you and your children out or what have you. And so that doesn't make it okay. That doesn't make it excusable. Like I want to make that very clear. We're not making excuses. We're not excusing that behavior. But in being able to expand our perspective, we are able to liberate ourselves from it, in which case the adversary no longer has power or control and can fully be cut loose and can fully be relieved. I hope. I hope that that's heard for the right people and by the right people, because I feel you. I feel you. And that's the plot. That's the plot. There's more liberation, more freedom, more space to create internally. That's not bogged down by assumption or memory or just what has been before. This is also how we heal from shitty relationships in order to find the love that we've been waiting for. Thunder affirms. All right, Capricorn, Capricorn. Oh, Capricorn, my dear. How are we? Hello. Okay, hello. Well, hello. Queen of Spades, Four of Spades. A lot of mind, a lot of ideation, probably a lot of expectation, um, which can kind of bog down fluidity and motion. We don't anticipate the rhythm; we have to feel it. We don't necessarily always. We're not necessarily always able to calculate and predict everything. Um, and I say this even with reading. It's like reading a particle collision. We pick up the frequency as it is, and we're able to see the multiple possibilities that occur as that moment expands. But if you were to change your mind entirely, that would change the trajectory of that particle collision, essentially. And so have fun with that space. Queen of Spades, Four of Spades. So let the mind not be bogged down in prediction, assumption, um, preconceived notion, in just facts and data to the point where we forget nuance and forget story and forget subtlety and forget feeling, like you could like in honestly in like the exact ways that like sure, AI could write you a script for whatever it is that you're doing, but is it going to sound like you? Probably not. But is it going to really capture emotion in the way a heartfelt story from you and from your heart would? Probably fucking not. Um, it'll try because it picks up on patterns and semantics. But the beautiful thing about the capacity to feel as a human too is, much like when we were talking about cancer, that root fire and that intense flow, and the ways in which we could go from having a bad morning to somebody making us laugh and it totally turning around our day. Which is also why, like, never underestimate a small act of kindness, however small, because you never know what people are fucking going through. And you know in your worst day, I also hope that for you, that somebody is just ever so kind and pleasant, that it makes you consider a different possibility. And in that, may you find more elevation, may you find more lightness, may you be able to see above the fog and, above all of the winding and rolling thickness of the clouds, obfuscating our view. Um, Kind of like fogs will cover the tops of skyscrapers, but when we are integral, it's not that we're at the top of the hierarchy, but it is that we're able to see beyond those things. We are able to see more expansively, like panoramic view, that has less to do with height and more to do with expanse. um 4 of spades, conductivity. Conductivity, and even the ways in which those obfuscating things have their own frequency. And so, kind of, again, to go back to other example, and like Occam's razor, never attribute malice to something that can be easily explained by ignorance. And that'll save you a lot of frustration. And that'll save you a lot of wasted energy on that person, place, or thing problem, when it can be used for, much like we talked about before, burrowing underneath and finding your new way through, or, an expansive perspective or a different perspective, or being able to see in a different light, if you will. Um, that also is cultivated in knowing the self and in safety. And so I think there is a big part, especially with Capricornian energies. There's a cycle of harmonies, all signs for Capricorn. So maybe that is very integral to this as well, because I think Capricorn in Western astrology is very misunderstood, and is too attributed with the material and with fiscal qualities that really aren't the only capacity we have for grounding or for wealth or for abundance or for value, even. So, in a big way, if we are not seeing the value in where we are now, it is because we are being asked to find the value in ourselves, because we are being asked to not analyze, but to bring our awareness to the value that we are and that we bring to any given crossroads or situation. That is integrity, that is conductivity. Quite honestly, even like swords, like in a theme in craft, and the ways in which that is a way to direct the energy, but also, like in the craft, like, don't go into the circle with fear in your heart. Don't go into your next endeavor with doubt or fear or shame. And unfortunately, that is something that I think, is a mask that Capricorn has been forced to wear or be, aware of. And that is the ways in which forcefulness and financial aspects rule so much of the Western world, and sacrifice the earth for it. It's calling you to bring awareness back to that earth. Yes, it is mind energy with these spades, but it is not just mind. And this 4 of spades is, where does the mind find safety? Where does the mind find refuge? Where does the mind find a safe place to look at their own reflection? Like, If you look into the mirror too often, somebody's going to call you full of yourself. And if you don't look into the mirror often enough or at all, like people often say with psychedelics, then it's a fear of self, or a lack of connection with self. The Four of Spades is like, okay, we've called the quarters, we've, set up our electric fence. Do you feel the charge? And let that be your inner sacred and safe space to where you can bring even your most unattractive emotions to your altar, to your ancestors, because they will not judge you, to the elements, because they will not judge you. The trees don't care about you feeling ugly. They'll remind you that you're beautiful, because you'll find this tree with this like weird stump and you'll be like, oh wow, that's beautiful. I feel like that stump, but you get me, tree. And they do, and they do. And when you feel misunderstood, take it to the trees, because the trees have seen some shit and they'll remind you that you're not that weird after all. And I do think that's something that maybe Capricorn can lean into. Be a little weird. Be a little weird instead of being like so starchy and pressed and like on your best behavior and, in work mode. Let a little loose, but not so loose that you lose sight of yourself. Let loose in the ways in which that your integrity thrives and grows, like the reed we talked about, growing like a beanstalk. From if this is the plot, then you are the seed, and your mind ought to be filled with all the ways that you can grow. And that is a regenerative, very giving, very fulfilling thing. That is an abundant thing. That is rich in spirit, and it opens doors to great wealth. Pisces, my dear, you were of high importance with this last moon reading, and I have only seen you unfold more like the deepest lake of them all. All right, loves. All right. Oh, okay. Interesting. Interesting. Ten of Hearts inverted, Four of Clubs upright. Sky blue, clear skies. The clear skies that opened up, much like we dealt with the Four of Spades, following with the heat of that electricity, of that capacity, and the ways in which, much like the surface just above the perimeter of the flame, offers just a little bit more clarity, even though it is like still potent with intensity. It is not the flame itself, but it is the clarity above it. The Ten of Hearts inverted. Pisces, how are we feeling? That feels a little intense, a little deep, a little diving in. Maybe we're feeling very void of what we've previously associated with our identity, um, or previously associated with what we were capable of. Maybe we're feeling less useful, less valuable in some way, shape, or form, or less like we fit in, even. Um, But please let that not rule your perspective, because most people don't feel like they perfectly fit in. In fact, most people feel misunderstood, especially in doing like translations from Western to indigenous astrology. So many people don't feel like they fit into this perfect little fucking box of the dilution of Western astrology. And so in that, let it not deteriorate your confidence in such a way that you stop seeing the best in yourself, and that you stop believing in the best of yourself, or that you stop creating with that notion. It is an opportunity to go deeper within the self and find out what really makes you move, what makes you tick. Like any river flows back to its source, to its mountain, even. And like any river can be traced to its delta and to the ocean, to a much more expansive capacity. And in that is not a tiny box for you to fit in, but a very expansive, very deep, very life filled space. Even puddles and ponds, really, like the puddle in the street is going to go into the solar systems, is going to go into the belly of this super extravagant solar system, really. Even though it still fails and the city still floods. But goes into the solar system, goes into these water reservoirs, goes into these water cleansing plants, and then goes back out into lakes, into oceans, into uh, you know, more expansive habitats, more expansive capacity for growth, much like the water that drips from our sink or that flows upon us in our shower is also a water that has been touched by our ancestors, has been here before, has touched many things, quite honestly. And the capacity of water to be so many things, to be fuel, to be jello, to be vapor, to be ice. We ought not compartmentalize ourselves. That is how we cut off a hand of ours in creation, when we need both to hold ourselves fully. And so let that be illuminating. Let that be clear sky ahead. Let that be clear waters with which you can see your reflection in. Because this Ten of Hearts is here because it exists in you, but it exists in your conviction, not just in your confidence that you've cultivated from the validation of others, but in your deepest heart of hearts and deepest knowing. Elementally, water, heart, fire. Um, these elements are not antithetical. They are not opposed. They actually really want to work together. They really want to synthesize their energy together. Trust me, I used to very much think that, you know, oh, I have fire and water in my chart. That must be why I'm bipolar. Uh, Maybe superficially, but there's so much more to that energy. And if you consider, I think most often, the superficial quality of it is like, oh, well, water puts out the fire and fire dries up the water. And realistically, like, no, when it is well tempered and when there is conscientiousness and awareness of it, much like boiling a pot of water, um, it takes a little time, but it takes a little awareness, and it takes some mitigating of the flame for us to get tea, for us to get sugary syrups and simple syrups, for us to get jello, for us to get mead, for us to get so many things. And in that, let that expand you into all of the possibilities that you could be. And much like we've talked about with other energies here, so much of our memory rooted in the same places that our trauma is, and sort of oscillating with each other in that memory, sort of feeding and perpetuating that cycle. When we are able to liberate ourselves from that, we open up ourselves to many possibilities where it's like, oh shit, I've never thought of this hobby, but maybe that had more to do with my trauma and response to it, preventing me from exploring that, than that ever had to do with my interests. You know, a lot of people would love to dance, but they don't dance because somebody told them that they were undesirable or unattractive at some point in life, right? or something unbecoming, right? Something not very kind, something that kind of shot them down in some way, shape, or form. Fill in the blank with whatever hobby, fill in the blank with whatever parent fucking told you the wrong thing. Um, and when we're able to liberate ourselves from that density, then we're able to explore so many other modalities and find interest and find fulfillment and peace and excitement in all of the things that we can fit into that space and that we allow ourselves to explore in. But I think when too much of maybe our identity has been associated with the validation or validity of its perception through other people, we limit ourselves very greatly in which paths we're actually able to take. I think this honestly would be some much deeper meditative trauma work. And for sure, there's free meditations or in my meditation library on my website. But I think to weave a greater relationship between the fire that holds these feelings and the ways in which we have let them flow, let alone release into the ether in some way, shape, or form, uh, will bring much more understanding to this kind of energy. So again, as much as I'm like, okay, it's hearts and water and clubs and fire, do a water breath, do a fire breath. No, it's a very deep story. It's a very structured story that isn't a stable one, and we've got to do some maintenancing to the framework of the house. Does that make sense? Ooh, okay, Aries, Aries. Oh, interesting. 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 Seven of diamonds, queen of clubs. So fire ignited, but also the ways in which it hits landfall. Like instantly, that makes me think of the storms that are very much that started in the ocean and then made their way to land. Um, the odds of it, sometimes is realistically kind of odd. And seven being kind of this luck of the draw of the luck of the draw. Um, and the ways in which that is not just luck, not just like random happenstance, but a conscientious awareness that provokes or pushes forward something or other. Um, very, very rarely, if ever, do I think anything just happens out of happenstance. I don't really buy into coincidences. And realistically, there's so many chemical components to what happens when a storm arises, right? But even the storms within us, we may not understand it right away, but if we sit with it, we can usually find something very related or altogether surprising, but deeply rooted in that experience. Um, in the Aries translation and cycle of harmonies for all signs, it is not just fire, but it is the air and the ways in which that travels is more akin to the crocodile or to the whirlwind. And so there's multiple elements at play, but working together to sort of create this rapid, expansive field. Which is why Aries can be so temperamental and can be so like my way or the highway, because they get very caught up in those elements, but aren't necessarily aware of where that really stems from, right? Um, the framework of our mentality structures the ways in which we can hold energy. And so when we feel the pressure against us of the winds bellowing in us, even that obfuscate our light or capacity to see light or capacity to see in the darkness, um, that is an asking to reevaluate your stability, reevaluate your footing, reevaluate what the rooting is of things. And when we establish that, that which is unluck turns into luck because now we're operating from a more aligned and coherent framework. And much like in other readings that we have called upon the relationship between the mind and the heart, coherence in this is where we get a deeper breath, a fuller breath, is where we get more literal oxygenation in the body that feeds the cells, that feeds nurturing health, and da 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 da, growth, all the good things, light in the cell, and electricity, and magnetism, and all of those good things, rather than just light for light's sake or burning it all to the ground. And something that I've found myself saying more and more to people as of late, so it seems perfectly relevant here, is when we just go directly into the light and avoidance of the dark or avoidance of the shadow, just desperate for salvation in God or whatever. That it's just physics that it would make the shadow stronger. If we bring something closer to the source of light, much like your shadow in the summer, you look down at the concrete when the sun's at its highest point, you look down at the concrete and your shadow's like 7, 10 feet long, right? And is more opaque and is more dense. The same thing happens when we refuse to acknowledge the root aspect of things and we simply gear our head straight toward the light or straight toward whatever the goal is. Like this is Machiavellian tendencies to the nth degree, and is very much a bull in a china shop. Is like fucking all horns. It's taking life by the horns, but like again, casualty, and a lack of concern, and ultimately a disregard for impact, which is a shame because areas could have a great impact if they were to consider the structure and the framework with which that impact comes from. That would light a lot more of your fancies and offer a lot more clarity than ignorance. And so perhaps there's also an element of fear, really. So much of that was focusing the flame, clearing the eyes, and also being able to ground into that energy, body energy, and not just in brawn, and not just in brain, but in subtlety, in nuance, perhaps, in a deeper understanding. Taurus. Speaking of bull, what's up, Taurus? Interesting. I forget which one this came up for exactly, but Three of Spades and Queen of Flames inverted. I didn't even see that happen. Um, Three of Spades, Queen of Flames, internal flame, and the ways in which we direct or build with it, the ways in which we fan the flame, the ways in which we offer the flame even. You know how like if you were to hold hands with somebody and touch an electric fence, the shock would go through multiple people, would go through everybody connected. And ideas spread very similarly too. Ideas spread very similarly, and Three of Spades very much being the mind, intellectual energy, um, the self-knowingness as well. Uh, I do think with this in particular, sometimes that becomes sort of a reoccurring pattern of infectious ideals. And that could be, that could be a great thing too, Laughter is contagious, for instance. Um, you hear somebody laugh and enjoy, and you're like, oh my God, that's so fun. You're having a great time. That makes me want to have a great time. But also stress is equally contagious. And it is not just like that person is stressing me out, so now I'm stressed. It is very literally like chemicals in the body, hormones that release and that release in your sweat. So, the stress that can spread in a work environment, especially when that work environment is shared. But when we have grounding practices, when we are able to nurture the self, when we are, and not to detriment, for sure, Taurus knows grounding, right? Taurus knows earth. Please also check out the full read in all signs with Taurus energies. But the ways in which we nurture the self is more so than just sitting and resting, or even rest requires you to actively pull your nervous system out of like hyperfocus or out of, you know, being like on 10 for work or being, stuck in any particular system. It's like, for as much as we've talked about compartmentalization, it's like a complete lack of compartmentalization, but only existing in one compartment, right? And that compartment doesn't necessarily fit for everything, doesn't necessarily fit everything. Just like we have an underwear drawer and a fucking sock drawer. Party up. Um, when we are aware of the rooting elements of us, or what makes us feel most nurtured, or what makes us feel most safe or comfortable or free or liberated in the self or most relaxed or what have you, there are ways to definitively innovate in that or interface with that. This is why the CIA and science has studied the sense of smell so in depth, because it goes directly to the brainstem, bypassing so many other processes that other sensations go through. And so it can trigger memories just like that. And because your sense of taste and smell are connected, this is why food is so bonding. This is why uh, not just food being nourishing, but is where at the dinner table hard conversations come up, or the ways in which people have even said like the weight of my heart is through my stomach. It is because it's an act of nurturing. It's an act of nourishment, not just because it's like nom 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 food, but because of the love that goes into it, because of the offering and the gift that it is. And so, how do you gift yourself without having to go on a shopping spree, perhaps? How do you gift yourself these opportunities and these moments of solace and refuge and relief without necessarily having to, go out and throw back a bottle or go on a shopping spree and maybe wake up feeling a little shittier about it or what have you. Um, and that's not to say that there's anything wrong with either of those things. Everything in moderation, right? But I think with just how much earth capacity. Taurus really has. Um, and the ways in which it's not just Earth, but the ways in which we move with it is an integration thing. And this is also where, our self care practices can also become just habitual. Like, yeah, sure, maybe going to get your nails done is what makes you feel, revived and like in tune with yourself. And, what makes you feel like you're thriving is a beautiful thing. There's nothing wrong with that. But after a while, after, 10 years of doing it, is that still the reason? And it absolutely very well could be. But I think sometimes people will reflect and they'll be like, oh, I don't think it does anything for me. I think I just do it because it's a pattern now, or I think I just do it because people expect me to, or what have you, but it's no longer as fulfilling, right? And so we reevaluate. We reevaluate. Maybe it's a pedicure. Maybe it's something else entirely. But the goal is the feeling, not the ends to the means. It is, in fact, the journey in between, which is something that I think we're all learning. So don't be too hard on yourself either. And no need to be defensive with the self, because we're all growing and patterns can change. And sometimes the ways in which we used to nurture the self just gets a little outdated or needs for you to bring your awareness back to it. Maybe it's not the thing at all, but just how aware we are of the whys and hows that we do it. Much like even there's a lot of conversation on Instagram about like doing yoga with or without music, party on. I think I've enjoyed it both ways. I've absolutely had beautiful practices with no music whatsoever. And I've absolutely had beautiful practices with, my favorite playlist. There's even in Decolonize Your Mind, I cultivate a playlist for each and every layer. Um, Most of it's instrumental, um, although there's not all of it. And, it's not necessarily you have to do this with this, but it is a cultivated experience. So maybe you do the practice silent and you listen to the playlist in a separate occasion, but it still evokes the same feeling. This is the way in which those things are allowed to expand and take up more space and take up and provoke more energy and capacity in said practice than it just be so rigid one or the other. And for sure, maybe it has been very rigid one or the other. And do your practice silent all the time, but you've never noticed just how natural music is surrounding us with birds in the trees and with the rustling of the leaves and with even the, nonsensical car horns going off. Is actually the ways in which we're constantly in an orchestra. And we can open our awareness to that. Or maybe we always have, a playlist and it's really hard for us to do this thing without that. Maybe it's a good time to try something new and sit in some silence and see what comes up and direct that mind fire and direct that mind fire. All right. I think that is everybody. I think that is everybody, right? We're not forgetting anybody? I think that is everybody. In which case, thank you for your time and thank you for your patience. I really hope that that offered you some knowledge, some awareness, and some relief, perhaps in just the validation of hearing out loud. So maybe something you've been thinking or something that you've been feeling but have not been able to identify. So I appreciate your presence. I appreciate your awareness. Thank you for being here. Wato, wato, atanato, ashili kweo. And in that, and with that, if you've been through this whole thing with me, I feel like it's overkill when these things go super long to also have the cycle of harmonies in it when it is also in new and full moon readings. And because so much of this also ties into our last moon reading and there will be a new moon shortly. You can go back to our full moon reading for the cycle of harmonies, or be on the lookout for the new moon incoming, where we will see what the moon has to offer with all of its planetary friends and do some breath work and integration. But it is available for you on other videos on my channel. If this offered you some nuggets of wisdom or wonderful little tips, tricks to keep on the back burner in your back pocket, and you resonated with it, then you can also donate or tip or tip. Um, Donation link and all of that will be in the description in the bottom, as well as any links to the courses or resources that I have available as well. A couple of those did come up. So I definitely urge you to check those out, as I urge everybody to decolonize their mind and to banish the patriarchy in both their hearts and the world around them. And you'd be surprised what paths can open up for you when, there's all these people talking about exiting the matrix and what have you, and da 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 da. It is a simulation system in more ways than one. And perhaps a huge part of it, a root part of it, is in understanding the root tones and the most mundane phonetics of it, rather than just the superficial and semantics and the commonality of words that we use. So there's a lot to offer. And also, like I said, the meditation library on my website, mytotemodification.com, does have a few different meditations that you might find useful as we move through these energies and through these feelings. What did I say? What did I say? Donations and or tips. There's also a research paper on micromediation efforts that you can totally check out as well. But yeah, I'll leave it there. Integrate. Feel it out, my friend. You are not in this alone. In fact, we are all the keynote in this cycle of harmonies. So party on, and I'll see you next time.